I did see that, and we can break down the actual trade mechanics too here. But as far as the guaranteed money, Woj and Bobby Marks reported that it's already been guaranteed by Chicago before they sent it out, and we can go into the numbers and why they would do that beforehand. Because I think it'll also go more again towards why I thought they might have a bigger market in January. So as far as the guaranteed money and how that all plays out, it's a little tricky when we're in June after the regular season is over, because when we're in June, we're still in the 2023-2024 salary cap year.
Right.
So when you're dealing with what salary are we dealing with, you take, for the most part, you're taking the lesser of the salary that was earned this year or next year's salary. So what happened was, well, Caruso next year, well, it's all the guaranteed salary is what you factor in. So because they don't want salary dumps anymore, right? So they don't want a guy getting guaranteed $1 million and he's on non-guaranteed 20. They can dump him and then the receiving team can cut him, right? They don't want those types of deals happening anymore. Yep. So with the non-guaranteed money next year, it was $3 million. So the outgoing salary was only $3 million for the Bulls. So what they were able to do instead is they fully guaranteed it, which brought it over the $9.5 million that he earned this year. So now his outgoing salary was $9.4 million. That's why they guaranteed it now. So then Giddey's incoming salary is, $6 and change. So now the Bulls get a trade exception of like $2.8 million.
Yep.
So that's how it works on their side, and that's why they guaranteed that money, because then they avoid using, because otherwise what would happen is you take the lesser of the guaranteed money, right? Mm-hmm. You would take the $3 million, then they would have to use an expanded trade exception, right? And then at that point they're hard capped at the first apron for next year. That's one of those tricky things that happens. So now what happens with Oklahoma City, you look at it from two different points of view. On Oklahoma City's side, it's the incoming salary that comes in. It's going to be that the salary for this year, the $9.4 million. Well, they do have to use the expanded traded player exception to bring him in. Right. Okay. So because they're only sending out $6.6 million or whatever it is around that. So what that does to them is it hard caps them at the first apron. And this is different than before the CBA. When you do this in June, it's going to hard cap you for all of next year.
Yep.
So that's significant for teams that are hovering around that first apron. So for a team like the Thunder, they're not going to come close to the first apron.
Yeah, they're still using cap space. They have cap space. So.
They're $70 million away from the tax right now. Yep. So they're fine. So it doesn't bother them. But if other teams needed to use that expanded, even if they had the exception to use, if they're hovering right around the first apron, they don't want to hard cap themselves. So they're not going to do it
because they lose a lot of flexibility.
Yeah. So that's not the case if you do it during the regular season and trade them during the regular season. You're not hard capping yourself for the next year.
Yep.
So again, it might limit your market in those types of ways. And that's kind of where I was a little, it would just be interesting. And again, we're not in the rooms. They may have had calls during the season and there was nothing there which I doubt. And then, in the off season, they just love Giddey and that's what they wanted. But I would guess that the market is a little bit slower just because of those specific rules and the limitations that you have at that point.
Right. Yeah, the timing really makes a difference. I think just the points you made about being hard capped and the expanded player exception and all these different facets of it, it really just makes it important for a team to know when to deal a player to maximize the value of that player, the value of what you're sending out, and just to make sure you're not kind of handcuffing yourself for the next season. Because like you said, if you do it for this next season, we're only in the beginning of the salary cap year right here. So if you do it for next season, that's a lot of time there. If you want to upgrade your team, trade deadline deals. We saw what the Mavs did when they made those moves in the middle of the season. If you try to do something like that, you're even more limited in what you can do. So That's a great point there. And I think a lot of our people watching this will learn a lot from that, and they can kind of use that to make more sense of what's going to come down down the pipeline, future deals. It's really
Yeah.
going to
And,
help.
and just to remind people, because, people hear first apron and second apron. And if you are over the first apron, just a couple of the major restrictions that you're going to have now is one, that I keep saying, this expanded traded player exception that essentially allows you to bring in more salary than you're sending out in a trade. Mm-hmm. So if you go over that first apron, you're dollar for dollar now. So that's a big limitation. So for example, this trade wouldn't have been able to happen if the Thunder were over the apron, because sending out 6.6 and they're bringing in 9. So it gets really hard when you start going dollar for dollar. Now, when you're over the first apron, you can aggregate a bunch of contracts to make it go dollar for dollar, right? You can have a 5 and a 5, send out 10 to bring in one $10 million contract. If you're over the second apron, you can't even do that anymore. It's one contract for one contract, dollar for dollar at that point. So I just wanted to point that out, because I start saying things assuming people know it, but there's so much out there, and it gets confusing.
Yeah. There's a lot. There's a lot to cover and to understand. So
there's a lot of other limitations as well. That's one of the bigger ones. And then once you go over the first apron, you lose your non-taxpayer mid-level exception as well. So teams that that are floating there, if they go over, then they lose basically a 12.8. I think that's what it's going to be this year. $12.8 million to sign a free agent.
I want to remind everyone that Colin has written about this. There's actually a new article on our website he posted about 10 days ago, and he really goes into detail on some of the CBA changes that we're going to see as we transition into the next salary cap year, as this month winds down and we get into July. So I highly encourage everybody to check that out. Just go to our website under articles, and you will see Colin's piece about all this. So if you